My name is Steve Rahi. I am a Premier Field Engineer specializing in System Center Technologies. Today's discussion is part 10 of an ongoing series talking about operating system deployment in Configuration Manager 2012. Part 9 discussed user state migration from the perspective of standalone USMT. Today's discussion will talk about USMT as it is integrated and used inside Configuration Manager 2012. So this is the agenda for this discussion. Really just want to talk about USMT and OSD in a few areas. First, the components, some scenarios, and then see USMT in action in Configuration Manager OSD. Right. So as we get into this, though, one thing just to underscore, we've seen it several times, different components. OSD doesn't do anything special with USMT. All OSD does is allow for what you could do manually to simply be automated and to be easier, right? So in so many ways, just like we deploy images using the ADK tools, we do USMT with the ADK tool USMT, load state and scan state, right? And other examples. So that's something that undergirds what we're talking about. All right, so first I want to talk about the components of USMT integrated with OSD, right? There's four that I want to talk about. Certainly there's the USMT package, the state migration point, and then computer associations. So these are all key. The computer associations, the state migration point, some of these are optional, but they offer some interesting advantages. So let me go ahead and pull in the lab so that we can look at what these options are. And I'm going to go ahead and start with the package. So let me pull that in. All right, so here's my lab. And if I go under Software Library, you see a list of packages. So now I've got a couple of USMT packages. Didn't intend to, but I forgot that I did. Doesn't matter. The USMT package, basically all it is a pointer. So typically a package is going to have three components. There's the package, there's the program, and there's the deployment. In USMT package and others in Config Manager like this, all we need is a pointer to the program and the source files. The task sequence knows how to operate from there. And so as long as we give it that pointer, we're good. If you get down to it, you could do all this manually too. You don't have to use the steps that we use. Probably mentioned this a couple of times, but you could build your own and point to the source location best defined by the package and do your own thing just as effectively. All right, then from there, we have the optional ability to leverage a state migration point. So you see that I have one already defined here. Well, let's look at what it means to install one. Before we do that, though, let's talk about what a state migration point is. So a state migration point is a place on the network that we have the ability to store user state data, right? So there are advantages and disadvantages of using a state migration point on the network that we'll talk about in a minute, but let me show you how to configure one first. Right? So it's just a site system role like many other things. So if I want to add a state migration point, I just choose to add the role here, and then move on, do some configuration. So one of the places I have to configure is where the path is that I want to store the user data when it's copied up across the network. I'll just call it test. And I have a couple options. First is how many users do I want to allow to use this state migration point, right, simultaneously or total, right? I think it's total. Can't remember. Either way, it doesn't matter. How many users do I want to be able to leverage the state migration point? And then what is the minimum free disk space I want to give to the state migration point? And this is minimum, knowing that you'll probably consume more than that. How much do you want to carve up right now to give to the state migration point? All right. And then from there, we have the deletion history, or deletion policy. How long do I want to keep a completed migration data around? By default, it's 1 day. Now, what do I mean by completed? When we do user state capture and user state restore, it's 2 steps. Right? Very often, those 2 steps will happen on the same machine. In order for that entire transaction to complete, the user state needs to be captured and it needs to be restored. If we don't have a complete transaction, then we don't mark the user state as eligible for deletion. Right? Once we know that the restore has been done, then we'll mark the state data as available for deletion, and at that point, that's when the timer kicks in to start counting down to the default of 1 day. If you want to extend it, that's cool. No problem. You can do that, and I probably would, just to have a little bit more buffer where I preserve the state migration data. But up to you, right? The last option is whether you want to enable restore only mode. So you might want to enable this when you first install the state migration point. You might not. It's really up to you. What this does, I think of a production server in production, one that you know might be coming up for patching, one that you know might be coming up for maintenance. Maybe it's going to be down for a couple of days, whatever the case is. And you want to enable the ability of this system to still provide restoration for the systems that have stored user state on that migration point, but you don't want to accept any new migration data. That's what this does, right? All right, so if I click next, the next thing I'm going to do is have the option to add boundary groups, because state migration points are similar to distribution points. They respect boundaries and so on, so you can have a preferred state migration point and so on. All right, one thing about state migration points too, well, we'll talk about the advantages and disadvantages real quick. Oops, cool. Well, before I do that, let me show you. So I've got one configured here. Same thing, I can just go to state migration point and go to properties, see the same window. No worries, I've got this one configured to SMP. So if I go over on the network to that share, you'll see that I have some user state data stored there already. Here, right? There's the user state data. I have some status files and things that I can look at, like the migration status and so on. Here's the XML doc that talks about it. Nevertheless, right, that's it. So now, what are the advantages? What are the disadvantages of using the state migration point? Well, state migration point is certainly a secure storage location that is not on the machine that's imaging. We're secure from a couple of perspectives. One, the user state stored on the state migration point is only eligible for restore by either the system that saved off the user state is the same system that's restoring it, so that is just implicit, it's going to work. Or you have kind of a replace scenario where one system stores off the data and the other system restores it. That's called, again, the replace scenario. So you would need to accommodate that union so that the system knows to allow it, right? That's called a computer association. I'll show that to you in just a second. The other thing, when you store the data on the state migration point, it's going across the network. We encrypt that by default. And we store the secure key in the database. So if you have a situation where you need to recover the data, maybe the data doesn't restore correctly, but the state migration store is there, you can restore it. Not a problem. We can, working with a Microsoft engineer, we can get the encryption key for you to help restore that data. That's how the system knows how to do it, right? All right. So let's move on. So the computer association here. So that is up under the assets and compliance. If we go under USMT, this is one place you could also do it. When you import a new machine, there's an option to specify the source machine. That's right here. Okay. But USMT right here is where we store it. Right here. So you see that I have a default one that I created here, just showing mapping between two machines. One is my source machine, Windows 8. The other is a bare metal install that I'm going to do, which is a very valid scenario. If I were to go create a new computer association, I could do that. The source computer would be one that is in the database as a ConfigMgr client, so maybe Windows 8 again, and my destination would be including bare metal. So here's another reference to my bare metal I could choose. Right? Here's the other thing. You can specify user accounts that have these rights to be able to interact with the user state. Okay, so again, more protection. All right. Cool. So that's computer associations, that's the state migration point, and so on. So let's pull the lab back out. There we go. And there are a few scenarios for using user state migration, and these are the three. We've already mentioned all of them. The upgrade and the reimage scenario all take place on the same machine. So the same machine will be capturing the user state and restoring the user state. And then the replace scenario involves two machines. where one is the source and one is the destination. Cool, so let's look at user state migration in a few scenarios, and we'll spend time demonstrating that. So just to reiterate, I put this again here, state store storage options. So you're either going to use the state migration point or you're going to store locally. If you store locally, it's preferred, most people prefer to use one of the more advanced storage techniques, such as hard linking, or there's others, volume shadow service, or even offline, as I'll demonstrate to you. The other thing, as we've already alluded to, with USMT, the default steps that we have in the task sequence, we have the default settings that we will bring to bear. You can certainly influence them by making certain selections, but you don't have to use ours at all. You can build your own user state migration handling mechanism if you choose to, and with the command line options you want if you don't like what we give you, and so on, right? Totally up to you. But we will use the inbuilt mechanism to do user state migration because it is suitable for most people, especially with the customization options. So the first one that I want to show you is the state migration point scenario. So this is where we're going to capture data and store it on our network state migration points. So let me pull back in the lab, and I'll show you the task sequence we have set up for that. I've actually got more task sequences set up than what I will use here to illustrate a couple of things. So here I have just a couple set up that I'm not going to demonstrate that illustrate it's perfectly valid to do what we call a replace scenario, where we capture the user state with one task sequence and then restore it to another machine with another task sequence. As long as your computer associations are in line, that should work fine. Okay. Then there are these four that I do want to show you. So here's the one with state migration point in play. So if I click on Edit, for this task sequence, we'll see the sections where we're going to use the state migration point. The first thing we have to do is we have to request space on a state migration. So very similar to how we would do a location request, right? That kind of thing. So we'll go look for a state migration point, request space on it, and so on. This is going to be for capturing of state data and such. So then we'll go actually capture the data. Then we'll release the state store because we're done, right? Then we'll go back and request it. This time it's going to be for restore. We'll have this step to do the restore, right? And then we'll release it again. Well, here's the state to do the capture. I'm not going to run through this whole task sequence and show both the capture and the restore. The capture is enough to kind of give an idea, and then the restore would be very similar and like we showed last time. So for the capture, these are the default steps. So we have the package that we want to use for USMT. This is going to capture all user profiles, or you can customize how the user profiles are captured. You can add in certain files here that you might want to use for controlling the migration. I'll just keep it at default. Here you can decide whether or not you want verbose logging, whether you want to skip files that are using EFS, and then how you want to copy the files, these options. Now we're going to use the state migration point because we've selected it here, and we'll know where to put it because task sequence knows how to figure all that out. Right? So but just so we don't have to come back and show all these again, if we're going to keep the files locally, right? Well, first of all, we're going to continue if some files can't be found or can't be accessed. We're not going to just bail the whole thing because of that. If we're going to capture locally, we can decide to use links instead of copying the entire file. This is called hard linking, or we can even do offline mode, which I'll show you both of these. Right? Okay, so let's pull in a machine that has this task sequence ready. So I've deployed this task sequence to my Windows 8 machine, and it's ready to run. So let me log in. Oops, typo. So I've got this ready. So here's my state migration point one. I'm going to go ahead and install it. Off it goes. And while it starts, I'm going to go ahead and open up the logs. We can see what's going on. So it's running. Let me pull this down so it's out of our way. CCM, logs, TS logs. So we'll sit here until it gets to the portion where we're going to do the state migration point. It'll be very quick. Just have a few downloads to do, then we'll see the state migration point log show up here. And we can continue on. Okay, Should have it very quickly. And there it is. So now if I look at my SMSTS log, I'm going to go ahead and pause it so we don't continue. Probably wouldn't anyway, but we're at the bottom now. So we successfully connected to our system. If we look up, we'll see that we downloaded the files, and then we'll have a section where we requested state store. In fact, let me just find that. There we go. So, oops, keep going. Requested user state storage, and we'll send up information about it, and so on. Okay, so you can see the whole transaction there. But the thing that we care about, SMB client capture, so on. So the thing that we care about really is seeing that we have some command line changes. So here we successfully connected to our state migration point. This is the path that we're going to use. And then this is the command line we're using to run scan state. So here's scan state. And then here's the location where we're going to store the user state, all this string right here. Some additional files /o, local only, encrypt. Notice this one's here, encrypt. And here's the encryption key, but it's represented by asterisks. Right? Why? Because we don't want to show you the encryption key in the logs, because that could be a security compromise. So we just represent it by asterisks, but that information is stored in the database. Right? All right, and used to release or to log into the state store for recovery and so on by the state restore. We're going to use EFS, copy raw, then other things. Here's the administrator account that has access. Here's the log location. Progress, we need a progress log as well. Here's the log for that. And then we also have two control files we're using, MIGDocs and MIGApp. Notice there's no MIGuser here. Right? You could influence that by the settings that you set on that step, but here's what happens with just the default ones that we chose. Right? Now, this is going to continue, not a big deal. We'll finish this and reboot into PE to continue the process. Nothing really extra to show you with that. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and reset this machine back to what it was, right? And then I'll show you the next one, which is a task sequence to go ahead and pull this out while it resets. A task sequence to go ahead and do local storage. This is different. So this is, instead of using a state migration point, we're going to store it on the local disk. So here we have a variable that's going to allow us to set the local disk path, and then we're simply going to capture user state. Same exact step, except we know now it's going to be locally stored. Same exact that I just used, but there will be a difference. Right? So let's go run this one now. So if I choose local, here, this one's the one I want, install, and it will very similarly do what we just saw, but we'll have a difference specifically in the command line. One key difference that I want to show you. Pull this down, out of the way, and look at the logs. Here we are there. All right, we're waiting now for the actual step to come along where we're capturing. So almost there. And there we go. Oops, I opened the wrong one. All right, so I'm going to get the right one. So now at the bottom of this, notice here we're now creating a directory to store the user state. Here's our command line. Same kind of thing as we saw before, scan state with, this is our path for storage, local only, same kind of thing, copy raw. Here's our log. Here's our progress. Here's the MIG files that we want to use, or the XML files, the migration files we want to use. What is notably absent here? What's missing specifically is we have no encryption. The state store is not going to be encrypted by default. Right now, again, you could influence that if you wanted to use your own custom step, that's fine. But on the disk, it's not encrypted. So bear that in mind if you're going to do local storage, right? Like this, that it's not encrypted, and so on, right? So good enough. I can even show you the, I can close this out and show you the place where we're storing the user state if I want to go to the root of the drive again. This is where we're storing the user state, and once we reboot into PE, it will be here, right? So it's good. The one thing that we don't want to do, if we're going to be doing local storage, let me show you this task sequence. Notice what was missing here. Well, it's not missing, it's just grayed out. There is no partitioning, format and partition step done. Why? Because you don't want to format the drive, because the drive is containing the user state, right? So if we reboot, you're going to see us go right into the imaging phase, which is what we want because the user state is stored on the drive. You don't want to overwrite it. All right. All right, so we'll go ahead and reset this and go back to what we were. All we're going to see is it reboot if we let it keep going. So, all right, apply this back. We'll let that recycle and close this out. Now, the other one, the other option we have, if we want to use it for local storage, is hard linking. So if I edit this, it's the same exact thing, except this time I have chosen the option to do a hard link, right? Well, let's see how that's different. So if we go back to our machine and kick it off, hard linking, install. Yeah, I have to do that twice. Probably didn't wait long enough. There we go. All right, off we go. Now, if I go back to my log, I'll wait. All right, so we're parking here. We're going to wait again. All right, so that's running. Let's look at the SMSTS log again. So notice this time we are using the same path. We're going to store user state here, but now we have a command line in here for hard link. If I can find it. Yeah, there it is, hard link, right there. Right? So it is going to be different. Well, how is it going to be different? Well, let's see. Let's go to the local drive again. We'll go into here, go into user state, USMT. It's empty right now. We'll wait for it to progress a little bit, and then we'll see what it looks like after it finishes the capture. All right, so it's progressed far enough that we can see it. So you already see the difference. There is no migration store like we just saw. There's just hard linking information showing what data needs to be preserved, right? So good enough. So let's go ahead and recycle this one and move on to the next one. Actually, we don't even have to recycle it. I just need to change the settings here, because the other one I want to show you is offline. Browse to this. Here. Okie doke. So now I'm going to power it off and power it back on. So while this is booting, this is just a standard boot media. Pull this out, let it load. So this is the offline scenario I want to show you. This is actually interesting. This is not unique to ConfigMgr. I just forgot to mention it in the previous session, but this is really neat. So here we have the same step to capture the user data, but notice that we're going to use offline. Well, what does that mean? What that means is you can capture user data from Windows PE without Windows even being up and running, the desktop OS even being up and running. If there's a Windows folder or something like a Windows.old, whatever, we'll go look in it and capture the user data from there, which is a really big convenience. It's also a little bit faster, right? I don't know how much faster, but it is faster. So if I pull this in, we're booted into Windows PE now, and we have this USMT offline. Well, let's start it. Okay, and this is the same system. I just happen to have Windows 8 on the on the hard drive, and we'll see what it does. Oops. All right, so we'll see it do its thing here in a minute. It's downloading all the files as we did in the running OS, and then we'll capture the data, and you'll see migration stores and such appear here. There they are, right? So if we just look at the test sequence log, pull this down, and I'm going to turn on word wrap because it's easier to see the full command line here, and go to the bottom. Then I have the same standard command line, no problem, no real additions. Offline is the only thing saying what directory I'm going to be capturing from, but the rest of it just works as normal, right? Here's where the log location is and so on. So a very efficient way to take a machine that is bare metal and just start it and capture. Now this is also interesting for machines that you, for some reason, can no longer boot, but the hard drive is intact. Maybe the boot sector was damaged or lost or whatever, and you want to capture data from it and go on. Well, you can definitely capture user state from that kind of computer because we're booting in PE. As long as there's a Windows folder, we go get the data that's there. So pretty neat option. All right, cool. So with that, it kind of rounds out what I wanted to show you in terms of the options for using USMT in Configuration Manager. Certainly there are some things that we could discuss further as far as customizing and building your own step and things like that, but didn't want to get into that right now, and it should be pretty easy. And frankly, these steps that we use for USMT, the default ones, are very customizable and generally suitable for this kind of thing. So we'll wrap it there, and we will continue on in the series next time.